Hi, welcome back to Behind the Headlines. On this segment, Maura and I are joined by Gene Barr, who is the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. Welcome, Gene.
Thanks. Great to be here.
It's a interesting time to be together and to talk about state government and state public policy. And quite frankly, as someone who teaches state and local government, my students have a hard time wrapping their head around the fact that we have half a budget. What is the status of the state budget? I understand it's making news now for the BBC and overseas.
Wow. Didn't know it hit over there, but I'm not surprised your students have a hard time wrapping their heads. Those of us in Harrisburg sometimes have a hard time wrapping our heads around this. And I think it continues to evolve. It now looks as if, as we sit here, that perhaps the Senate will go along with some of the House versions because the House has demonstrated they can get 102 votes, which is that magic number for this. So we may be near an end. Just keep our fingers crossed and see.
Okay.
Since we're only a few months late,
What's the problem? What's going on? Why is it taking this long?
Look, there's a couple of things I believe. First off, the amount of money anticipated to come in the previous budget year didn't come in.
Okay.
We always, as you know, you forecast, and the budget year for your readers, for your listeners, goes from July 1 to June 30. So what happened in the 16-17 budget year, we didn't get enough money, so we're short. As we look forward in the 17-18 budget year, you say, okay, we think revenues are going to be X, but expenditures are going to be Y, so we're short here too. So we're about $2.2 billion short. So what do you do about that? There is not a desire to do what are called broad-based, which are the personal income tax, sales taxes, et cetera. So there's no desire to do that. And unfortunately, we also view some of the other proposals as being broad-based, which is a gross receipts tax on natural gas, electricity, phones, et cetera. Severance tax, which we believe will adversely hurt not just consumers, but will hurt the industry. Here in the Commonwealth, there was a hotel tax proposed, there was a warehouse tax kicked around. So you couldn't get the proverbial 26 in the Senate, 102 in the House, and have the governor sign. So it has been difficult to get to that point. So they're looking around, are there dollars laying in funds around here in Harrisburg that we can cobble together to come up with what we need here? So it has been a difficult process.
And Gene, what did the House find, or what did they think that they found in terms of those funds that are lying about and unused?
Well, there's so many special funds around, and say, okay, well, we think that there's X more in this fund than is anticipated to be needed in the next few years, so we can take that. And then, of course, you get into the argument of, no, we think we might need it and so forth. So between that, some additional gaming revenues, we're not quite exactly sure what the final borrowing may look like. Between all that, cobbling something together that we think is going to avoid a tax increase. And of course, if there's no tax increase this year, the chances of one next year, an election year, aren't good either. So,
well, there's a lot going on surrounding this. There are injunctions being sought.
Yes.
There is money being borrowed. There's talk of what the long-term implications are going to be. There's been credit downgrades. The sooner the better, probably.
Correct.
But July would have been better than October, November.
Not sooner the better on credit downgrades.
No.
Those are bad. Those are
Sooner
bad.
the
Okay,
better
good.
on passing the budget, because
Yes,
the longer it
completely
goes,
agree.
it actually costs us much more money.
It does. It does have an adverse impact on the consumer. As much as if you as an individual have a bad credit rating, when you go to out to buy a car, you're going to pay more in order to get that loan because you have a bad budget rating. The other thing I think is important to note is that our expenses have gone up and largely driven by pensions. And while we did get some pension reform earlier this year, it was only future employees that were impacted. So we've got a pension bill that is now roughly 10%, not labor cost. The legacy costs of the pension are 10% of the general fund budget. And our view is until you do that, you got people who say, well, yeah, it has gone up a lot, but it's going to level off. Well,
Level off at what level?
well, see, that's the problem. It's kind of like, I'm sitting in my house and the water's rising from the flood. Don't worry, it'll level off at the second floor. Well, that doesn't help me, and it's not going to help Pennsylvania
Only if you're
consumers
on the
for a
roof.
long time.
Yeah.
Only if you're on the roof.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about the credit downgrades? How far has our credit been downgraded, and what does that mean to the people of Pennsylvania in terms of additional costs for us?
Well, there could be additional. I forget what the exact rating is, and all of the credit ratings agencies give that. And what happens is the state regularly has to go out and float bonds, et cetera. So because the market now believes Pennsylvania's credit ability to pay is not as good as it was a year, 2 or 3 years ago, they're going to demand more in advance. They're going to demand a higher rate of return, higher interest when the state goes to float those bonds. So who pays the interest? Taxpayers pay the interest.
That's why this is getting so expensive.
And it is getting expensive.
Right.
And again, it's the inability to find a final resolution we've done pension reform for future employees. The Senate in the past has passed a bill that in our view was a really good bill that would address and deliver current savings. So that bill delivered no current savings. The Senate has passed that, but could not get the votes in the House for that. So these are all the things that are combining together to create the financial problems that Pennsylvania has right now. And also due to the fact that unfortunately our economy isn't growing to the extent that other states are. So if you can grow your economy, then you get more personal income tax, more corporate net income tax, more sales tax in, and then you can offset that. So we've got a not good situation of higher, rising expenses due to pensions and other things, and unfortunately, economic growth that is not up to what we'd like it to be.
So this governor has been big on the severance tax since he was running for governor.
So tell the viewers what a severance tax is.
Well, the severance, I'll let Gene talk about it, but it's on the shale and gas industry.
Correct. The extraction of the natural gas from the ground. That's correct.
And so the business community, collectively, have been very successful in not letting that happen. Is it still possible?
Yes, it's still possible.
Yeah.
I mean, because there are still people who want to push it, both certain Republicans in the Southeast, certain Democrats. I think the severance tax issue has been the victim of so much misinformation over this. And we have a tax. It's called an impact fee. If you want to just call it a severance tax, fine. And we continually hear that, oh, geez, well, Pennsylvania is the only state that doesn't have a severance tax. Texas has one. Okay, Texas also has 0 corporate net income tax. Ours is 9.99. So when companies look where they're going to invest, they look at the total tax obligation liability that they're going to incur when they locate there. So you have to roll everything in, and unfortunately Pennsylvania's topography is more difficult to deal with than places like Texas, Oklahoma. And our permitting, the Senate, to their credit, acknowledged and put in their severance proposal, which we didn't like. They at least acknowledged permitting is an issue. So if you don't get those worked out, and for those people who say, well, the gas is here, the companies have to, no, they don't have to be here. That investment can go elsewhere. There are opportunities elsewhere in this country and in the world for investment by companies looking for energy development.
Well, Gene, you mentioned the impact fee that the oil companies pay here to the local governments for all the effects of their activity in those regions. In these discussions that are going on about a severance tax, if Pennsylvania would adopt a severance tax, would the impact fees then be phased out?
Well, that's a great question. There are some people who say we should layer it in on top of that. There are others who want to give, and there's various proposals. Some proposals would give credit to the company for whatever impact fee is paid. Some simply lump it on top. There's various permutations of that. But the interesting thing to look at, those dollars go to all 67 counties. And yes, the places where the natural gas drilling is occurring, those areas receive a disproportionate amount of money because the impact is greater there, to be blunt. Sure. So they get more. So if you're going to reorient those dollars, those local communities will not be happy with that either.
Well, I don't want to let you go until we talk about Amazon.
Oh, yeah.
Amazon received 238 bids to move or to put a second headquarters in a location, and Central Pennsylvania was one of them. And yes. I think as a collective group, not just Harrisburg, correct?
Well, there's at least five or six different. I mean, Philadelphia has a couple of proposals, I believe, couple sites. Delaware County, suburb of Philadelphia. I believe that Lehigh Valley put one in. South Central PA put one in, Pittsburgh, and there may be another, and they all went in independently. So
of every list that I see of the potential, the most likely locations, we're not on the list.
It depends which one. I mean, Moody's had us as pretty likely. Depends on which one you look at, and I think it makes sense that Pennsylvania has a decent chance because Amazon put some criteria in. They wanted a metro area of 1 million or more. They wanted a critical mass of higher education facilities that could deliver the kind of people for workforce that Amazon wants. They want mass transit. They want international airport. And Philadelphia, and Pennsylvania has a number of places that can fulfill that. And so I think that we do. Our cost of living is lower here than if you're looking at a Boston, if you're looking at a Washington. I don't know, and look, I honestly don't know whether it's going to be East Coast. My gut feel says they'd want to be on the East Coast. and Amazon has picked Pennsylvania already for some of their warehouses. So does that give us a leg up? I don't know. But we're close to population centers, lower cost of living. We've got tremendous educational institutions in this Commonwealth. We do have a road system, water systems, all of that I believe Amazon would look at favorably. Where we fall out, I don't know.
Well, we'll find out next year.
We will find out next year.
Along with everybody else.
It's 50,000 jobs, about a $5 billion investment, so
It's
you can
big.
Understand why people are chasing it.
Right, right.
And that was my question that I had for you, Gene, was based on, there is an Amazon warehouse
Absolutely.
in central Pennsylvania, just outside of Mechanicsburg,
Yes.
a rather large one, and I wondered if that would help, for example, Pennsylvania, Harrisburg's bid for this facility or not.
It certainly
helps me
could.
get my stuff faster. Yeah.
It certainly could. We certainly hope that the fact that they've selected PA in the past might lead them to take it on for their newest additional investment in this Commonwealth.
So other than budget, other than business taxes, other than severance, what else is the chamber working on right now?
Well, there's a number of things. One of them was we're trying to adopt some workers' comp reforms, and there was an interesting development. We're trying to put in, not to get it too in the weeds, a formulary that will say for a workers' comp patient, geez, doctor, you're trying to prescribe 90 days of an opiate. We don't think that's required.
Geez, yeah.
And so it's the biggest social issue we face. So we're looking at various ways we can of trying to address this opioid crisis. And it turns out, unfortunately, we've had some opposition to trying to pass that. It has come from certain folks in the legal community. It turns out that, according to a story in the Philadelphia Inquirer, a very detailed story, it's a law firm that owns a pharmacy and then dispenses from there. So very interesting article. So we're having to put up with some opposition on that. But again, we believe this is something that we really need to look at. One, to help control costs for employers, which is important. Get employees back to work quicker. It's better for them and their families the quicker they're back to work. Mm-hmm. And among other things, to address this opioid crisis that is devastating Pennsylvania and this country.
There's got to be some pain management that can fill in the other 60 days or so.
We believe there is. And look,
Yeah.
the flip side is there are people who have chronic conditions who need to be on it. These are not medicines that need to be completely avoided and banned. There are uses for them. Mm-hmm. The issue is finding the right use, and prescribing 3 months of opioid out of the box, in our view, is something we need to be extremely cautious about.
Not a good starting point.
Not a good starting point.
What are the biggest issues for the remainder of the year for the chamber, Gene?
Well, certainly finalizing the budget is part of it, making sure that we get this budget done without any tax increases or new taxes that will adversely impact Pennsylvania's competitiveness. Talk a little bit about the workers' comp situation, which does tie into our legal system here in Pennsylvania, and we're part of an effort to try and bring reform to that as well. Chamber continues to work on our workforce efforts, and interestingly, the Amazon situation has helped highlight that to make sure that we can deliver the kind of employees that Amazon or any other employer is looking and needing when they move here. So we have no shortage of issues on our plate moving forward and moving into 18 as well.
Great.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well,
Right.
we want to thank you for wrapping up, sort of giving us
problem.
a good tour of all the issues that are out there at this point. It's an interesting time in state
Yes.
government, to be sure, isn't it? We're
Yes,
very
it
lucky
is.
to have you with us. We will be back again next week, same time, same place. We hope you'll tune in. Maura and I will see you then.